network-centric logs, dynamic empanelment. In these terms, I'll explain what they mean. All of them provide us with different sources of digital information, whether that's to deduplicate usage across devices or whether that is just to get raw tonnage of digital information. Then finally, we sort of get into best practices, and that's where we look at validation. ComScore uses non-probability methodology, which has its own ways of validation. You can't use things like the central limit theorem, and this is going back to, sort of stats 101. You can't use basic formulas for margin of error when you use non-probability sampling. So you have to use other methodologies, like jackknife replication. I'll talk a little bit about why that's useful to us, but why that itself also has to be validated by probabilistic validation panels. So there's a lot of terminology, but I'll try to explain it in very plain terms, because it's really important to lay a benchmark for the validation of digital measurement in the future. All right. So the challenges that we face at ComScore are huge, and part of it is that we're trying to measure across all sorts of devices, from a PC to mobile to tablets. We're also trying to measure different formats: browsing, video, apps, ads and content, search. Okay, spin the wheel around, and we also now have to integrate different sources of data, so it can come from site census, network census, panel, it can come from third-party segments. And then we have to link the processes, whether that's buying, planning, servicing, reporting. So it gets pretty complicated. It ends up looking like this giant wheel that is the scope of the challenge for digital audience measurement. Okay, so what have we learned in our 13 or so years of doing digital audience measurement, knowing the faces that the challenges that we face? Well, digital requirements include depth and representativity. So there's an endless amount of possible behaviors. One of the things that I'll show you later on is that if you believe that as web usage migrates from a PC to a tablet to a phone to shared use machines, that the demographic composition of that usage and that behavior is identical, you're very wrong. So you need to measure directly across all of those devices. And we have some proof of that from our own iOS panels in the US. So it gets very, very tricky. You need to capture micro audiences. We need to be able to integrate what we're doing within the broad media research environment. So that ecosystem is much bigger than digital. We need to be able to use best practices to align our data with print, television, not so much radio per se, but we do a lot of data integrations now with print and consumer behavior, and obviously with video and television. We need to have the same kind of standards in order to be able to integrate with those research environments. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go along. But there are probably no less than 7 or 8 cross-media applications today where ComScore is the source for the digital data. But there are competing cross-media measurements. It could be a Nielsen fusion or a BOPE or something like that. So we need to get to a standard so that cross-media measurement, cross-media campaign planning can be measured directly. We want to look at digital consumers across all platforms. So one view, the web-only view, is no longer sufficient. And we need to be able to integrate methodologies. So we've already started this. In 2009, ComScore rolled out what we called unified digital measurement. So we brought in site tagging and panel measurement, brought it together. So that's an example of a multi-source measurement. But it gets even more complicated, and you need to be willing to take multiple sources, bring them together, and be able to measure across different platforms. Okay, we've also learned a lot of lessons once we rolled out what we call UDM, or Unified Digital Measurement, understanding all the information that we got from census tags and integrating it with panel data, rolling it out across the world. It rolled out across the world probably in less than 2 years. We found out a lot of important lessons. One is that panel requirements are staggeringly high. It's very difficult for us to get representative work panels. We're not the only company that struggles to get representative work panels or large enough work panels. So UDM is one of the solutions for that. It's basically been impossible to build the perfect panel. So what we do is we build the panel that gives us the information that we need, and then make corrections for any bias, and you'll see how we do that later on in this presentation. Publishers are willing to provide, willing to tag their sites. They understand the value of the site-centric data into their final measurement. So that participation is something that you can get. It was something we were told, hey, you're not going to get everybody to tag their sites. Well, in fact, publishers understand the value of that and are willing to do that. Some elements are better measured by tag-based collection, so ad networks, video, mobile. It's very difficult to create a panel measurement, a user panel for mobile. Why? There's so many devices. Our GSMA data in the UK, for example, has about 1,000 different devices and operating systems. Try to build a panel that has a meter on a phone for all of those different types of hardware and software. And every time it changes, you need to re-engineer that meter and make sure it stayed on the phone. Okay? So life's getting trickier and trickier and trickier. Much easier to measure that with tagging. Okay? So important lesson. And UDM has to evolve in response to feedback. So we have to make better assumptions about persons per cookie, the way we work out that formula. I'll talk a little bit about that, and hopefully that addresses some of your questions. We also understand key gaps in panel methodology, and we want to basically incorporate as much site-centric information into the panel methodology as possible. Okay, so we've learned a lot of lessons. What's the outlook? Well, we're going to drive the future of panel measurement with site-centric information. So what you'll see is in the next few slides, especially near the end, we're going to talk about how user panels are still very important to get demographics and for us to make adjustments, for example, for cookies per person. You still need to be able to see that cookie deletion information and behavior on the side of a panel. But what's really going to drive the improvements in panels are panel projections based on census-based information. So device census calibration is what we call it, where you can look at device census, that's what people are doing out in the wild, not just in our panel, but there's going to be a weighting or stratification that can come from device census information that allows you to correct for any potential selection bias in your panel. And we know we're going to have some. We have a non-probability sample. Anybody can join the panel, and anybody can decide not to join the panel. Okay? So you know that there's a potential there for bias. Compare that to what you see in the census and make adjustments. Okay? It's not as simple as that because we have to make sure that what we see in the census is really what's going on in the census. And that is why we also deploy something we call a probability validation panel, or a PVP. So it all comes back down at the end to triangulating on validation across jackknife replication, validation panels. So it gets a little statistical, but we basically have to draw a line in the sand and say, you need to validate at this level for these measurements to be the one and only numbers that are used in a market. Okay. So we're going to drive panel methodology through site census measurements, integrate digital measurement into the broader media ecosystem. So in other words, adopting industry standards like whatever the industry standard or gold standard enumeration survey is in a market, that's the data set that we're going to use for our enumeration targets. In other words, our weighting targets for the digital online population. We've already started to do this. So we licensed the Print Measurement Bureau in Canada, MRI, we have a relationship with in the US, the National Readership Survey in the UK, EGM in Spain. So the list goes on. So we've made a lot of moves in that front. We're also looking towards having the same demographic variables across all markets. So instead of just age and sex, we'll have age, sex, presence of children, number of people in the household, et cetera. So we want to align with other media and have the most possible demographics as possible. We'll also deliver a lot of transparency through public auditing. And that's, again, really just a call to arms for the industry to say, let's just have one audit to make sure that everybody is measuring, all the measurement companies are measuring in the same way, so that we have a consistent set of numbers. We're going to move digital beyond the web, and that's what I'll talk about with tablets, phones. That's a core part of the presentation that I'll tell you about. And then, of course, we're going to develop cross-platform integration techniques. We've already done a bunch of those, as I said. We can use statistical fusion, where we are the digital component that's brought in with either print, or it could be television. It could be consumer behavior data. We have a project going on in Mexico as well now with Starcom. And we're going to accommodate platform-specific methods to deliver a unified view. So again, there's always going to be this mix of tag data and panel data that's going to drive future measurement. Okay, so that was kind of a meaty introduction to some of the stuff that you're going to see. But I wanted to have it summarized and in a presentation so that if you wanted to look at it again later. Let's talk about how ComScore currently measures digital online audiences today. And then at the end, I'll show you what some of the new enhancements are going to be before we get into sort of the challenges of mobile and tablet measurement. This diagram here, which I like to call like a DNA diagram, starts from enumeration, goes all the way through to the unification of the data, where we produce unique visitors, page views, durations that are based on both site census level information and panel information. So for enumeration, that's where we get our population targets, our online population targets. And as I said, we're moving towards using the surveys that are the industry standard. Very often those surveys are conducted using face-to-face interviews or probabilistic methods, so they're very high quality. They might be smaller than a ComScore panel, but they give us a good bead on what the actual online population is in a country. And this is really important. I mean, there are markets where different surveys within the market are off by 5, 10, 15 million in terms of the online population. So if you're trying to get a share or trying to get to a unique visitor number, depending on which source, you'd have a very different number. So that accounts for some differences across markets, even within markets, depending on if one company is using survey A and another company is using survey B, you're never going to add up to the same number. Okay, and this is kind of silliness. We need to get to a gold standard that everybody agrees on. Typically what I've found is that the print survey tends to be of very high quality, and we've piggybacked on that because a lot of other media buy the consumer behavior data from those print surveys. Okay, so it's a logical choice for us. How do we recruit? Well, so ComScore recruits online. Okay, we measure online, and so our panelists need to be online. So that's how we reach them. Okay, and it's completely non-probabilistic. In other words, I don't know whether you have an equal probability of joining the panel or you do. Okay, but I do know that we're trying to let everybody have an equal probability of getting an offer to join the panel. And we do that by using a whole bunch of partners, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. So we use online recruitment. There's really 3 major ways. We use 2 of them, and I'll explain those when I get to. So just when you think the pain is going to end, I actually go through each step in more detail after all of this. So just prepare yourself. There are a lot of digital challenges that are presented in digital media, but there's also a lot of solutions. So the complexity offers us some solutions. For example, low-touch passive measurement. So we have a software meter on a PC. You don't have to log in. You don't have to tell us that you're in front of the machine if it's not a single-user machine. You just start a session on the web, and we assign that traffic to you. So we can recognize you through biometric signatures, through keystrokes, through mouse activity. Okay, and I'll explain how that works. So we're taking advantage of the digital technology itself for measurement to remain passive. And less obtrusive measurement means people will stay on the panel, they'll act more natural. You know, if you're being asked what magazine you read last week, you're more than likely to remember the magazines that you want the interviewer to know about rather than the magazines you don't want the interviewer to know about. Okay? Not that any of you would be reading magazines that you'd be embarrassed about, but so panel bias correction is the next step. We know that through this methodology that you're going to have potentially a bias in your panel. You might have heavier users, for example. You might have more young males that are attracted to some of the gaming offers that we have for recruitment. So what do? We build in weighting, demographic weighting, and also behavioral weighting. Okay? And I'll talk about that. It's something that we call device census calibration, which is really using the power of what we can see across our tagging protocol. When we've done all of that, we allocate we allocate all of the traffic, the page views, unique visitors, to the 6-level reporting dictionary, which we call a client-focused dictionary. And so the 118 categories, and then there's 6 levels down to the entity level. And basically, this makes sure that everybody who wants to be counted is being counted properly. Okay? So there's nothing that's left. Non-essential domains are excluded. Traffic is moved to the right country, et cetera. It's very important. It's much easier in a television or magazine world. I used to work in both, and you had 100 magazines in a country and 35 channels, and we have 15,000 websites in Canada, 25,000 in the U.S. I don't even know what we report on in Mexico, but it gets exceedingly complicated. So the client-focused dictionary is extremely important, and it's dynamic. Okay? We can measure this, a measurement company doing magazines can measure the same 100 magazines for 3 years before anything changes. Ours changes monthly. Okay? So there's a whole system for updating that regularly. And then finally, we bring together the panel-based information. So we get demographics from the panel side, durations from the panel side, and we get total tonnage, work traffic. All of that comes from the tagging side, the site census side. And how do we put it all together? Unique visitors is a little bit more complicated. We use a cookie deflation factor. Page views is really simple. Whatever the tag says you got as a legitimate page view, that's your page view number. If you weren't fully tagged, we use the panel to update that part of the site that wasn't tagged. So we'll go through how you unify the numbers, and that's it. So there's our whole methodology in 5 minutes, but now we'll go into a little bit more detail. Okay, enumeration, I think probably everybody in this room sort of understands that if you start off with very bad targets, no matter how good of measurement you do, the numbers aren't going to make sense to the industry or to the market. So we want to always have a gold standard so that we can measure the demographics for the online population, and those are our weighting targets. Okay, we've been using either a high-quality gold standard or Eurostat or some other government official source if we can't get a local gold standard. And ComScore has moved to measuring 6+ audiences around the world from 15+. There are a couple of markets that are still 2+ out of legacy, like the U.S. and Canada.
2 years old.
2 years old.
Yes.
Yeah, we start them really young in Canada using the internet. No, it's because what's happened is they wanted to be aligned with other media, and other media were measuring 2+, even though it's actually not lawful to target advertising to children. So you can't buy data that way. But that's the number that they want. Because what will happen is if you go from 2+ to 6+, now the total number goes down, and nobody likes to see the number go down. So it's just a legacy. No one ends up using 2 to 5-year-old data. Right. We can actually see it. That's an interesting question. So what happens is if we see children's behavior, because we see everything that's happening between the machine and the internet. And there's obviously stuff that's like children, a children's site. Then we know it's the parent putting something in front of a child. If it's not allocated to the parent, it doesn't go away. It goes to the child. And if it's in a market where we can't report on children, that's just held aside because it's not a reportable person within the household. But you can actually see it. So they don't. No, I guess we don't. No, you can't sell it. So it's there. We collect it, but it just doesn't go anywhere. Yeah. Oh, sorry. So panel recruitment. Now, not sure how much of this anyone here is familiar with of what ComScore does, but I think I should take you through some of this. The reason why we don't use probability sampling is it's really prohibitively expensive to try to build a panel as big as we need using probability methods like random digit dialing or face-to-face, where you need to have a list of the people you could contact and their demographics and the fact that they're online ahead of time, so you know there's a probability of contacting them. So by the time you got to about 1,000 people in your panel, you've now gone bankrupt. So it's really just not a tenable thing, because we need huge panels. We need huge panels because we're reporting on thousands of websites. We also need huge panels Down the road in this presentation, you'll see for something that we call jackknife replication. So for empirical views of the margin of error around your estimates, you need to make sure that you've got as much of the online population as possible in your original sample. Okay? So large samples are important here in the digital world, and you just can't get them in a probabilistic fashion. It's just very, very expensive. And even if you did try it, okay, even if you did decide you're going to do this in a probability-based way, the non-response takes away from the quality of your probability sample. So if you get so much non-response, you now have sample selection bias, just as you would if you did a non-probability sample. And now you've got the same problem, but you spent a lot more money getting that problem. Okay? So basically, we need scale, and there's issues with probability sampling in terms of costs. Okay? So what do? We use something called an affiliate program, where it's banners that lead you into an intake system called permission research, or we use third-party application providers, which we call TAP. Okay? And I'll show you these. What happens with these large non-probability panels? Well, we use something called a panel dashboard. We use calibration, and we use replication studies in order to adjust those non-probabilistic samples. Okay. Well, I'll start over if you want. Sure.
Like, I really in Mexico, there's a lot of people that go to internet cafes to get a connection to the internet, but that's not covered in the panel, right?
It's not yet, but that's my future. Yeah, yeah, it is.
That would be great.
Yeah, it's true, because in countries like the U.S. and Canada, that's almost non-existent.
Right, it's not a problem.
Right, it's not a problem. Mobile is more of a problem, but in some other markets, Brazil's another great example. I'll be in Brazil next month talking about this. Shared use is a really big deal, and we are starting to bring that in. That's one of the future. So we'll have a total universe report here in a couple of months, December.
I was going to ask when you're going to bring that.
Yeah, December. Yeah, but I'll tell you a few more things about it. I don't want to jump ahead, but the total universe report will be total unique visitors, but no demographics. Further down the road, you'll get demographics, because it has to become planning quality. And that's a different animal. Okay, so affiliate program is basically where we have our banners. There's some examples down here. And we hope that this will appeal to some people who are interested in making the internet a better place to be, so they'll join a panel that's measuring internet activity. But primarily, we get most of our panelists the other way, which is the third-party application provider. And that's where we have dozens of partners around the world. And I think today it's over 50. And what those partners do is they offer hundreds of different, quid pro quo, hundreds of different offers for you to see an offer to join the panel. Okay? So essentially what will happen is you'll be surfing around and you'll search for something, and then you'll get a little ad for that product, and you can click on it. So the reach of that ad could be 80 or 90% across the entire internet, and that gives everybody, every different type of user, an opportunity to join the panel. Now, they may systematically refuse if they're a certain type of user. That's why we can have bias, and that's why we have to correct it. What I want to do is take you through a TAP recruitment in sort of step-by-step fashion. So this is, first of all, this is the permission research. These are the types of banners that you would see around the world that might lead you into the funnel to join permission research and join the panel. But the predominant way that we get people today is through the TAP system. So here's an example where someone is looking for photo animation software. It's called Morpheus. This is not Morpheus, the Morpheus that was the file sharing thing that got shut down, but this is the this is a different Morpheus that was photo animation software, and this is really cool. This is where you can take your face and turn into you turn into Richard Gere or whatever, right? Not that I've ever done that before, but and a lot of people do it with their kids' pictures and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool, and it's not cheap. But what happens here? So someone is in Google and they say photo animation software, and so far nothing that you're doing has anything to do with ComScore, right? You're just doing a search. And what shows up, because it's very popular, is Morpheus software. So you say, okay, yeah, that's what I'm looking for, and you click on it, and you go to the Morpheus page. Okay? Again, this has nothing to do with ComScore, except that you have a free download button. That free download button is a sponsored button by our partner, who this is one of their offers. They also have about 150 others, but this is one of them. It's free because ComScore is sponsoring their sponsorship of this free download. Okay, so far you have, you have no idea that you're going to even be asked. You're just looking for this software. Okay, and you say, well, free download sounds pretty good to me, so you click on that, and then you start to set up Morpheus. Again, you haven't been invited to join a panel. You're just picking up your free software. But as you do that, you are asked now if you would join, and I've skipped a couple of the steps, but you're asked about, this is still Morpheus, so you have to accept their agreement. It's completely separate from the ComScore agreement. Okay? And then you're asked about joining Premier Opinion. Okay? And it's pretty clear language. This software allows millions of participants in an online market research community to voice their opinions by allowing their online browsing and purchasing behavior to be monitored, collected, and once anonymized, used to create marketable. So it's in pretty plain language that we're going to watch everything you're doing. Come on, join the panel. We're going to watch everything. And you get free software. Right? So none of these two radio dials is colored in. Okay, so we want you to say, I do accept or I don't accept. It has to be very clear that we are going to see what you're doing. Okay, we don't keep track of your bank account number. Sometimes Ivan does, but we can see all of that. Okay, we can see purchasing. So, because in fact, what we do, our e-commerce estimates in the United States. I don't have a slide of this, but it's a really interesting. I think over the last 5 or 6 years, every quarter, our e-commerce estimates come out a month before the Department of Commerce estimates. That's the government source, and they're spot on. Ours come out a month before theirs do, based solely on what we can see purchases online from our panel. So, if you don't believe that you can get a representative panel that can give you high-quality projections, just look at the e-commerce estimates. I mean, they may as well just buy them from us because they end up sitting right on top of our estimates every year, every quarter. Okay, so whatever we want to see from here, we take back. We don't look at everything. We just want to take back the URL, make sure it's a proper page view. We do look at some e-commerce because we sell a lot of e-commerce data. We don't take your credit card information. We just take the expenditure and the category. Okay, so you have to give us explicit permission to do that. And even if you say no, you still usually get the software for free. Okay, it depends on what it is. So you can say no, and you still get Morpheus software. And a lot of people say yes. And we lose most people in the first 30 days or so. If they hang around past that, they can, their tenure could be 6 to 8 months or almost up to a year. Okay, which is an amazingly long time considering that we're watching everything they're doing on their PC, right? And usually we only lose them because they've changed operating systems or changed hardware. They don't typically deinstall our application. It doesn't slow anything down. Their surfing behavior is as it normally would be. And I can tell you that for a fact because we see everything. So it's not like they're typing in their name every time they're surfing and they know you're going to see where I'm going. We can see everything. We don't report on a number of sites that you can imagine that don't sell ads. Okay, so once you've said yes, you take a short survey. This is the registration part that tells us where the demographics come in. And one of the enhancements that I'll talk about that's coming to Mexico and globally is dynamic registration. So we know where you are, and you'll get this survey in the right language, and it'll be a little bit more extensive. So basically, all the demographics that we want are going to be collected from direct observation. If we didn't get them here, we would come back to you with serve you a little pop-up, or we could use an ascription methodology. So we want to get away from ascribing or assigning demographics. We want them to be directly given to us. Okay, and this is where it happens. No, you don't get any incentives for being on our panel. You get Morpheus, yeah, and that's it, or whatever you were looking at. Yeah, we don't pay our panelists. Okay. So we also don't want to appeal to take a survey type panelists. Yeah, if you are collecting money from 7 different access panels that you work on, one, we can see what you're doing, so you'd be removed from the panel. So we know that you're doing that. But 2, you don't get any money. So there's really the incentive is just to let us see what you're doing so that internet publishers have to compete by giving you a good product, basically, or, so it's your voice, right? If you're doing it to make money, you're not going to join our panel because you just don't get that. You don't get anything. Okay? Interesting model. Let's give them nothing and see what happens, right? Yeah. Okay, so Morpheus is one example. It's kind of a good example, but there's a whole spectrum of stuff from PC utilities and productivity tools to desktop personalization, appearance tools, all the way to games and entertainment. Okay, a lot of people think that, oh, we're just giving away free games and stuff, and that's not true. We're really trying to appeal to a wide range of internet users, from a very light user, heavy user, male, female, okay, young, old. You're trying to appeal to everybody because we want an equal probability of being given the choice to join the panel, whether they take it or not. Okay. The other thing we do is we try to appeal to those people who don't want anything for free. But let's say they say, oh, you know what, I don't mind doing this. And they have some environmentally conscientious thoughts. So we have a Trees for Knowledge program. This was supposed to plant about 1 million trees, and it's now probably over 3 million. I think it says 2.5 million, but that's now dated. So you join the panel, we plant a tree for you somewhere. Everybody feels good, right? There's a new tree somewhere, you're on the panel, and so the Trees for Knowledge has been wildly successful, and we use the Trees for the Future program. You can go to their site, and it shows you all the work they're doing around the world. So it's been a great combination. Okay, passive data collection. As I said before, the meter is not a web meter. You don't have to log in. It stays passively on your machine. You do know it's there. It's in the little desktop. It's on a little desktop icon. So if you want to deinstall, it's very easy. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't hide on you. It does let you deinstall it. It's not persistent. We've had ideas like that before. Well, how about we make it so you can't deinstall it? But, so basically, it captures URL, engagement, so it knows whether you're on an active window or not. Okay, so it's very sophisticated. We call it a C proxy or ComScore proxy. So we see everything that you're seeing on the screen, and we know whether you're using it or not. Okay, it knows whether an ad was delivered, whether it was clicked, and now we can actually verify whether you saw an ad because we just bought the ad exposed people. We know what other applications you have, Excel, Word, etc. We also know everything about your computer. Okay. So what kind of operating system you have, etc. That's all important to make sure that we can measure every kind of device. Okay, so if it's a 64-bit machine and our C proxy wasn't working, we'd be in trouble as people migrated to 64-bit machines. So we have to be able to see everything, okay? And we can see both HTTP and the secure version. Okay, so not a lot to say there. It gets very techy very, very quickly. So just to know that it's not a web meter, it's completely passive. We also have a passive measurement philosophy for session assignment. So you might be asking yourself, okay, well, if Ivan doesn't log in when he uses the machine, what about when his wife goes to use the machine? How do you know who's doing what? Well, we use something called session assignment technology. And the reason why we've gone in this direction is that we don't want you constantly having to type in your name or log in. There's other services that use what we would call sort of a browser interface. So wherever you are, you have to log into this portal, and then it'll measure what you're doing. And again, you're constantly having to tell the company what you're measuring. Okay? So we didn't want that approach. We wanted it to be the least intrusive it could be, the least fatiguing, and the least biasing. So how do we do it then? Well, most people have some kind of a marked session. So when you get on the internet, you typically check your email, check a social networking site. You go to some, or a subscriber site that you go to. So you let people know, if they were watching you, who you are. Okay, so these are called marked sessions, and a very high percentage of sessions are marked sessions. So we know when Ivan is on and when he leaves, because when his wife comes on, she goes to the same kind of sites, especially ones that she subscribes to. So it's very easy, makes our life a lot easier. When that doesn't happen, we actually look at the mouse behavior, so the way your mouse moves around, and your keystroke activity. So dot, com, and other common 4-keystroke occurrences. Okay? So you might think that's really cool. It is pretty cool, but all we have to do is be able to differentiate between Ivan and his wife, not Ivan and everybody else in Mexico. Okay? It's just his fingerprint versus the other fingerprint that's on that machine. Okay? So it's deadly accurate because the threshold for comparison is very low. It could work at a much higher level, but it doesn't have to. And that's a patented methodology that we use. So we never have to ask, whose session is this? We can assign it. How do we know it works? Well, we have panels where we do know everybody on the panel. We ask them to log in, and it's purely to validate this technology over time. Okay? All right, traffic allocation. So this is where,
I have a question, sorry. What about the security of the information? For example, if I'm in my house and I have to, I don't know, enter to something about the work and has like private information, how?
Credit card number, something like that.
well, we hash out. Yeah, we can see it. We hash all of that out. So we take, it's part of the agreement. It says, we take every effort to, so we'll have like maybe a number or two and everything else is hashed out. Anything that comes back to us is hashed out. And then we are compliant with a whole bunch of different agencies, trustee, et cetera, that audit us every quarter. So yeah, it's a big deal because you're taking back personal information. So none of your personal information can be linked to any numbers or credit cards, et cetera.
It's only for statistics, right? Like
Yeah, it's only the audience measurement part that we need. Which website did you go to? We don't link it to any other information of yours. And even the e-commerce, it's really how much did you spend on a category, how much of it was taxed, how much, but not the card number. Right, yeah.
And also on that note, what about if you come across some really unethical kind of behavior? You just have to ignore it, right?
Well, we don't measure anything like that, so we're not, it wouldn't pop up on our screen. Right.
Okay.
So, for example, like people get arrested and then they police subpoena Google and say, did they do a search on, how to kill my brother or something like that, and they use that against you. That doesn't happen to us. We don't, because although we track everything, we don't keep track of that, right? That's a Google thing. We hash out all the information. We just want to know your activity. Right. Right. Now, the meter could be set to collect anything. So every instance of a certain word. But if we took back all that information, it would just blow up. And that's not our service anyways. But of course, because you can see it, you can say, okay, we want to take back all this information. Right? Just like we want to know whether an ad is appearing in the visible page. We take back that information through an algorithm. But you wouldn't want to take everything back because you'd just be overwhelmed.
Too much, basically.
Yeah. You'd spend all your time filtering it. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, so I think I jumped a little bit ahead. Did I? Bias correction. Okay, so I talked a little bit about recruitment, and you can tell right away sort of that because it's non-probability, we don't really know who's going to join and who's not going to join. So how do we try to prevent getting a really biased panel towards, let's say, very, very heavy users? That's a common accusation, okay? So one of the things we try to do is use as many partners as possible that have very diverse offers, and they work around the world. And there's over 50 of them now. So in any given country, I just checked the Netherlands the other day, there were over 51 partners operating for us in the Netherlands, building that panel, okay? So we don't take any access panelists or take a survey partners as the question was asked. And also, because they advertise, our partners advertise, the reach of any particular campaign for them bringing in recruits is very high. And in some cases, we estimate it to be 80 or 90% of the reach of a market, okay? So hopefully what we do is we cast a very wide net, and that should reduce some of the bias. It doesn't guarantee it, though, okay? And I know that, and we'll talk about why that's important. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to use both demographic and behavioral weighting in order to make corrections for that, okay? So we may have too many men, or we may have not enough women. We're going to have some demographic weighting to do. Weighting doesn't make a very bad panel into a good panel, okay? Not just demographic weighting anyways. You need to also weight for behavior. And we do that by looking at census level information. And that's the device census calibration tagging. So we use both methodologies, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we do that. That's why the demographic numbers, the demographic weighting totals, have to come from a very high quality enumeration source. Otherwise, you're weighting to a wrong total to begin with, okay? And the behavioral weighting has to come from a very reliable census level source. If we're using our own tagging, we might believe that it does show us a view of what's going on in the wild, the page intensity by category. However, you get to page intensity by person through cookies per person translation. So you have to believe that the panel that you have is giving you a real representation of cookies per person. Okay? And the way we do that is, again, we have to look at a validation panel that is probability-based. And we'll talk about that. Okay, how else can we help to prevent bias? Well, if a partner is systematically giving us way too many of a certain demographic that we don't need any more of because now we're weighting them down, we will turn down that partner. Okay, so we call it like a dashboard. It's like a dial. So we'll say, Ivan, stop recruiting young men for us. We have enough. Okay, and we'll ask another partner who's very good at getting us elderly women, and we'll say, look, we incentivize them to get us more. Okay, so we have some control of the intake. It's not huge because if you're way under, it's really difficult sometimes to build that number up. And if you're way over and those people stay on your panel, you can cull them out, but you're never really helping the side where you're short. Okay, it gives us some control, but it's not a complete solution. And this is an example. We was just looking at this for the UK. These are very detailed reports, so they go across all the demos. And this is for partner A, so there's 50 of them, 50 different partners from A to whatever. And then we look at active panelists, in-tab panelists, what's the actual population. So these numbers are way too small to look at, but these are very detailed reports that we get in all the markets, and that the statistics team that does the recruiting takes a look at this and says, okay, how should we adjust the partners? Okay, so it's a very big process for us to do that. Traffic allocation, again, at the end of the day, it's all about reporting things in the proper level of the hierarchy, and our clients tell us where they want to be reported. So it's a client-focused dictionary, or CFD. Okay? And this is an example of a client-focused dictionary. It's a 6-tiered structure from property all the way down to a subgroup level, so all the way down to the entity level, the lowest level of the hierarchy. And there's an example here where we have Yahoo, Yahoo Sites, Yahoo, Yahoo Search, and you can keep going all the way down. Okay? This makes sure that we have all the different platforms, that we're going to measure reach properly. And again, this is something that is updated on a monthly basis with all of our clients. In some cases, they don't make any changes. In other cases, they change monthly. You might have 130 for a client, and then the next month you have 160. So they can have an incredible dictionary across all these levels of the hierarchy. And there are rules. So in other words, you can't stick, your sports site in a category where you would become number one. So there's a content rule that says, hey, you're not a sports site, you're a banking site or whatever. So, we do monitor it, but we work with the client to make sure they're reported the way they want to be reported. Okay, and finally, unification. So this really gets at why are some numbers different than other numbers? Why are ComScore numbers different than a Google Analytics number or an Omniture number, or et cetera? Okay? One way to get at a unique ID, so first of all, there are many ways to get at a unique number. It's more difficult to get to a unique visitor. That is a person, as a set of eyeballs, not a cookie, not a browser, okay? And I think the IAB in the US and some of the IABs around the world agreed that if you're going to use the term unique visitor, you have to be talking about a person. So you need a panel. Well, automatically that rules out most of the measurement companies except Nielsen and ComScore that have huge panels around the world, if you're going to report a unique visitor. Okay? But let's talk about how we got to that. So you could use a web analytics approximation of a unique user, which could be a cookie ID. If you can set a cookie on that machine, there are browsers that are and devices that are not going to accept cookies. There are people who systematically delete cookies, and there are people who don't care and leave cookies on forever. Okay, so there's a lot of issues with that. You can also look at IP and user agent combinations. Well, if you have the same IP address in the same company, we don't know how many people are there. Okay, because you could have the same user agent IP combination. And IP, there are certain percentage of IP addresses that are always going to change. We've done study after study of this, because believe me, if that's what we could use, we would use it. We do use persistent ID, and I'll show you this a little bit down the road. We do use persistent ID to look at household panels where we want to look at duplication across a household, a connected household where you have multiple devices. So we do use some of that information, but not to get to a unique visitor. Okay? So cookies can be deleted, and when they are, the same user can be counted multiple times. The common error is at least 2.5 times. It could be as high as 4 times. Okay? IP addresses change all the time, and that causes inflation of user counts. In any case, a unique user is really an attempt to identify a machine, or really it's a unique browser, okay? And in some cases, people have multiple browsers per machine. I think down here I looked at, that's actually a figure that I calculated for Australia quickly. Some 56% of machines in our panel had a session on one or more browser. And since each browser sets its own cookie, you're going to have she's saying, no, that's not true. Each browser has a cookie on a machine. You can't dedupe, right? So people get excited about digital measurement here. I like it. Okay, so multiple browsers, multiple machines, cookie deletion, IP addresses changing. All of these are confounding factors when you're trying to get to one number. Okay. So here's an example. Just in the course of a week, the same user has 3 cookies placed and deletes twice. Okay. So this site reads 3 distinct cookies, which means this one visitor is counted 3 times. If you didn't account for cookie deletion in the course of a week, we report monthly. Even if you did it daily, you'd cut back a bit, but you'd still have cookie deflation problem. Okay? So it doesn't take long to figure out the math of this, that you can compound this problem by 2.5 to 3 times. So when a Google Analytics number is twice as high as a ComScore number, it didn't take that much to get there. If the way they treated cookies is different than the way we treat cookies. And I'll tell you how we treat them. Okay? Because we can see what panelists are doing. So we can see by direct observation who's deleting a cookie that came from a specific entity on our panel, right? And that's the key. I'll show you that in this. Okay, so unified unique visitors. UDM starts off with census level information, okay, and that's how we're going to get to unique visitors. So we collect third-party cookies, all right? We filter that cookie data to get rid of any, whether we have an IAB bots list, spider data, crawlers, anything that's non-human is gone. Anything that's international is reported in the right market, so that's gone. So we filter for country-specific traffic, and then we put it in the right location: home, work, mobile, shared use. Okay. So right now in Mexico, we report on home and work. So there's another reason why you might have a difference, because another company might be projecting out to what they say is the total, which includes shared use and mobile. Okay. And if ours is saying home and work, well, those are 2 different populations to begin with. So you're going to have different numbers. All right. Now, when we get to total universe, we should be accounting for all of this. So now if there's still differences, it's probably related to how you define a unique visitor, right? So we use the panel to understand cookies per person, and I'm going to explain that separately in the next slide, but that's relying on entity-specific user behavior. Some people aren't going to get a ComScore cookie, and that's because there's a portion of the site that's not tagged. So you might have just adjusted your site to add another microsite, and you didn't tag it. You didn't tag it, but you want the measurement for that month. So we see what happens to that part of the site on our panel, and we add it in. So the benefits of having a large panel, a large high-quality panel, are still there even when you have unified data, because you are going to miss stuff. Even sites that are 99% tagged month to month, something happens where somebody makes a mistake and removes a tag somewhere, or adds a site, or does something, and you'd lose tens of thousands of visits. Okay. So we use the panel to check those parts of the site, and we add what the panel projection for that component. Okay? And then, of course, the panel helps us deduplicate across home and work and other locations, and I'll show you how we do that. All right, so how do we get cookies per person? Well, when a tag fires off of so if you've got a ComScore tag, or you've got an Omniture tag who we partner with, we have certificate tags. Our tags are using the Akamai network, which is, I think now for years, been the fastest, most reliable one. We do benchmark tests every 4 months. I didn't include the graphs here, but we like to show them usually that we're faster than Nielsen and stuff. I took it off here because it's not propaganda. This is a research presentation. But it is faster. It is faster. So just so you know, it's many microseconds faster. But so what do? Well, when that tag fires, a cookie is placed. Now, if you are a panelist, we see the cookie being placed on our panelist. So we can see whether there's cookie deletion, how quickly, how often, by site, by type of panelist. Okay. So that's where we get our cookies per person behavior information from. Unless you can see what somebody's doing to that cookie, you're guessing. You might have an average. Oh, I think cookie deflation should be 2.5. But we can tell you that across categories and across demographics and across devices, the cookie deletion behavior has a ton of variation. Okay? So you can't just have one number. You can't have one number by category even. We do it at the entity level based on observations of cookie deflation, cookie deletion at the panelist side. Okay? So it's really, again, that's another reason why having a large panel is important, because you want to see as much of that cookie behavior as you can through direct observation, right? Tags will fire millions of times. We're not going to get all of them, but we're going to get the ones that the panelists can see, and we can then make adjustments to cookies per person. We adjust cookies by looking at users that delete or block cookies, multiple browsers per device, multiple devices per location, so where you might have a static IP, and multiple users on the same device. Okay, so you may not be deleting cookies, but your brother uses the same machine, and they are paranoid and systematically delete cookies all the time. So we know by user at that machine the cookie deletion. Okay? So if you can't observe it with a panel, you really don't know that cookies per person information. Okay? Well, I believe it is very, very high quality cookies per person information. That still needs to be validated across a probabilistic validation panel. I'll get to that at the end of the presentation. If you're all still standing, we'll still talk about that. Okay, so we use ComScore. ComScore calculates the cookies per person at the site level by using country-specific panel observations. Okay, so it'll be entity level for Mexico for a specific site. Okay, so it's not like we took a number from the U.S. and used it over here or anything like that. Okay, it's 43 reportable markets. All of them are done with the same methodology. Okay. So you might think, wow, that's sheer perfection. How can you have any enhancements? Well, there's room for a few enhancements. One of them is improved demographic assignment. I kind of alluded to this earlier, where what we've really done is tried to get more dynamic about it. So while you're being recruited in the recruitment funnel, you will get a registration process that is in the language that you are surfing. So we have part of our proxy can see the language, not just the language that your computer is set at, but the language of the page that you're on, okay? Which is very important, because some people will go to English pages, but their machine is set to Spanish or whatever, and they might be surfing in a different language. So there's a dynamic delivery of that registration page, so that we have a better chance of getting all of your demographic information at the time that you can make a decision to join the panel. Okay? So that's very important. We also have, and I'm not going to get into these in a lot of detail, of an outlier and attrition. So through the course of a month, you need to be giving us information for the whole month for you to get, for you to be reported that month. So it's 30 days or whatever it is. But we might only see information for the first 2 weeks. So did you leave the panel? Did you suddenly you're not on the internet anymore? There's an attrition model that can help us decide whether you should stay in the panel because it's really just lower usage, or whether you've really left the panel. So we've built in better attrition modeling and outliers. So that would be an extreme, and there's someone who has like 8,000 pages per day on a site. We know that's probably some kind of a bot, and we can remove that, or someone who's extremely low. So on the outliers, we have a better methodology for removing those outliers. Okay. We talked about going beyond home and work, and that's what we call Total Universe. Total Universe is really a product that's going to get you a number, okay, a unique visitor number across all the locations that we can now measure. When we introduced UDM, we could actually see tags firing across everything. So across a phone, across a shared use machine. We just didn't report it. Okay, because one, we needed a weighting target. We needed to know what is the shared use online population in Mexico, in Brazil, in Canada, et cetera. We needed to know what the mobile one was. We needed to be able to deduplicate across those sites. So did you also go to this site from your phone? Did you also go to this site from a shared use machine? We needed to understand that behavior. All of those pieces had to be in place before all the tagging, tracking that we were doing for the last 2 years could actually be reported as a unique visitor where it was properly deduped and properly weighted. Okay? And the next step will be to assign demographics to those. Okay? And the reason why that's really tricky is that we don't just use user panels to get at this, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second, but a user panel is obviously one where I join the panel, you know my demos. If I'm using what I call a dynamic panel, which is just cookies, there's no demographics. I can learn something about the behavior with a dynamic panel, but I can't learn anything about demographics. So that's got to be done in a different way. Okay, so now we can actually assign locations to all of that traffic, and once we filter all that census traffic, then you can report it out on mobile phones, shared machines, work, and home. Okay, and you're going to get a total universe page view, and there's a total universe report that you'll see that is going to be part of the interface now. Okay, and you'll see that, and it's going to roll out globally. Mexico will have it in December. Now, I didn't quite get at some of the specifics because we've actually patented some of this, and it's just finishing going through some of the legal process. But essentially, you've got home and work, other, and mobile. Okay, and those three can overlap. So there's parts of them that overlap, and then there's a part where all three of them overlap. And each one has its own deduplication. So home and work has a home and work deduplication that has to be done. We use something called the Jeffcott function. One of our partners in Australia, his name is Jonathan Jeffcott, developed it. And we can actually, send you the mathematical function if you want to see it, but it's based on observations of people that go to a site from both a home and work machine. So we deduplicate it. For mobile, we have to deduplicate between web and app usage. And for shared use, there's schools, libraries, and other shared use. Okay, so essentially the math looks like this. It's A plus B plus C minus the intersection of A plus A, okay, and then it continues, right? This is good. This is good stuff. And actually, this is sort of the theoretical. Then there's the real math behind this, which has to come from what we need to do is actually have some observations to fill in those unknowns, okay? And how we do that with different kinds of panels, whether it's dynamic empanelment, common network empanelment. I'll explain what some of those things are. But we actually have a whole methodology deck that goes with this. So when we roll this out, we'll be doing a few webinars showing you this. I can't give you a lot of those details now because, as I said, it's sort of still in patent protection. But we do use a lot of the things that I'll talk about today, like dynamic empanelment, to get at those duplications. So it's easy to say, well, we got to take this little section out because it's duplicated use, and we got to take this section which is duplicated across all three. But how do you get an estimate of that? And there are ways to do it. In the U.S. is a good example where we have panels across operating systems for different types of phones. For Apple, we have and you can get a tablet panel. That's not going to be possible in every market. So the same solution isn't going to exist everywhere. It depends where you can really afford to build user panels across mobile devices, PCs, laptops, etc. Okay, so that nicely brings us to our, I think it's the last topic, but. However, if you look at all devices that are web-enabled now, so that includes your mobile phone, includes your tablet, you can see that nearly 40% of Internet households have at least 3 connected devices. Okay? So that makes things very tricky for deduplication across a household activity. Okay? So mobile devices and tablets are starting to drive a trend towards mobile device access. Behaviors are different across devices. So PC behavior is not the same and does not represent activities across all devices. And let me show you this. This is from an iOS panel. So we had people using Apple phones, Apple tablets, and the Touch. Sorry. It was one of those that I couldn't remember. Basically what you see here is, in the category of maps, the incremental reach is very high. It's 56%. Okay, so that means people don't just, the way they use mapping on a PC is very different on a mobile phone. Wherever they are, they want to use that map application. Okay, so the incremental reach is 56%. Now, social networking, where your behavior on your PC and your behavior on your phone are similar. They're high-frequency events. Okay, so the incremental reach is only 12.5% because you're high frequency on both. Okay, and look at the incremental duration. That's the minutes spent. It makes a huge impact. Even social networking, which is actually not have a lot of incremental reach, is almost 3 times the duration once you start incorporating iPhone and iPad. Okay, so the behavior that you see on a PC isn't just moving over. You need to measure directly on the device because you can't carry that over. Okay, There's a competitor that's doing some fusion work that way, where they're taking a measurement from tag data and taking the demographics straight over from the PC behavior, and that's just not going to work. It's just going to convolute everything. You can see just across these categories. It starts with an N.
Oh, I didn't do it.
Well, I can't tell you, but it starts with an N. Okay, and the trend towards a multi-platform world is just beginning. So this is actually U.S. data. It's not the same across the world, but you can see the smartphone penetration in the U.S. still pretty small. Relative to other parts of the world, it's 33.5%, but the smartphone population is growing at a clip of 50% annually. The reason is, and I was explaining this to my colleagues earlier, it's very expensive to own a smartphone in Canada or the U.S. The data plans are hugely expensive. Like, you have to cut off your arm if you want a smartphone. So the penetration has been low. And the iPad U.S. number is only about 5% of the population. It's probably going to hit 10% this Christmas, okay, because people will give them as presents. So if you adjust the vertical axis to 100%, you see that, oh, okay, actually, this isn't a majority yet of people moving to this, okay? These people don't represent all online users, but it's going there, so we need to be ready, okay? So 66% of Americans do not yet have smartphones. That was a pretty surprising statistic this morning. Okay. Basically, our philosophy moving forward is that we need a multi-source, mixed methodology type of strategy in order to measure across all these platforms and all these different behaviors. We already started that with UDM. I mentioned that at the beginning. This is like a conceptual view of unified digital measurement, where we take the census data, take the panel data, bring it together, and we get to unified digital measurement. And that gives us census level information that we use to derive some other statistics. But it's going to get a little bit more complicated than just site tagging. Basically, that ecosystem for measurement has these 5 components, so it's gotten a little bit more complicated. It includes network logs, site tags, application tags, household panels, and user panels. So user panels are what we use today. Site tags are what we use today. The other components are relatively new. I won't spend a lot of time on them, but network logs is something that we do in the UK. So we have the GSMA contract there. So the four major carriers in the UK give us all of their network traffic. Okay, so we've been doing that for years. We've been processing their data for years, so we've learned a lot about it. Has a huge blind spot that we don't see Wi-Fi. Okay, so you only see web activity across the mobile phones so long as it's through their network. But we've found a way to model the Wi-Fi because we've had the data for years. Okay, so network logs are a very important component of multi-source measurement, something that we'll use. They're not going to be available everywhere. A lot of the times, so for example in Canada, the mobile network carriers don't like each other. They're never going to sit at a table and say, hey, let's give the data to ComScore so they can report it. Right? They don't even want to talk to each other. They don't like each other. It's just not going to happen. Okay? It happened in the UK because they all make some money by selling the data. Okay? Site tags are going to be the way forward, because you can get tagging information from a tablet, you can get tagging information from mobile. We already do that. So extending that out is going to be a huge way forward for measurement. Application tags, same thing. They'll be specific to an application. We'll be able to get tonnage, but then we'll have to link it back to demographics. Household panels are something we call dynamic empanelment. So if you have a static IP, we can tell everybody that's using the same Wi-Fi in the household. So across devices that are within a household, we can deduplicate usage. Okay, and that's going to be really important for understanding, at least within a household, how to deduplicate traffic. And then finally, user panels are never going to go away because that's our core source for planning quality information, which includes demographics. So there's a series sort of charts that summarize that. So you've got metered panel, publisher tags, network census across the different types of coverage, from platform all the way to demo availability. And site tags for publisher, from a publisher tag perspective, basically are going to be the foundation for cross-platform measurement. And then demo availability, it's a metered panel. Now you're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to get a metered panel on a mobile phone. We have one in the US. The economics make sense there. It may not be possible in a lot of other markets. It's very expensive. So you'll have to use other types of multi-source data, and that will include things like publisher tags. Okay? The coverage across a publisher is going to be variable. It really depends on whether they're going to have a mobile optimized tag across all of their possible websites for us to be able to measure everything that they want. Okay, so this is actually the toughest part of the presentation. So is everybody ready? Okay, this is next generation digital measurement system. Basically what we want is we want industry oversight. We want an auditor, a body that says this is the metric that defines cookies per person. This is how you should, this is the type of enumeration you should use. Okay, so it's really a call to arms to say, ComScore recommends this, but if nobody's going to sit here and tell us where the line in the sand is, we're all still going to have different numbers. Okay, so it's a bit of a call to arms. Panel control and composition, we talked about using partner dashboards. We talked about enhanced sample selection. What I really want to talk about now, just to close out, are these two areas here. How do we control behavioral bias, and how do we provide you with some kind of a margin of error around the estimate? Okay, so down here you can use something called jackknife replication study. How many people here have ever done something called jackknife replicates or have heard of it? No? Bootstrapping? Jackknife. This is good because now you'll have really cool stuff to talk about, like at a bar. You can talk about jackknife replication. So listen carefully. This is good stuff. Ivan does this all the time at bars and talks about jackknife replication. So because it's not a probability sample, I can't say, well, yes, your estimate of unique visitors is X plus or minus Y. I can't tell you that because it was a non-probability sample. I don't have a formula that tells me what's the distribution around that. Okay, so it's sort of basic stats, but with a big wrench thrown in it because it's non-probability. So what you can do is use something called jackknife replication. And jackknife replication just takes samples out of your original sample by removing 1% of the original sample. So it's like resampling, and it creates a distribution. That distribution, theoretically, is the sampling distribution around your data. Okay? But it presumes that the original panel that you had a sample of every type of person in it so that you could resample them. And we don't know that. So again, that's a call to arms for using a probability validation panel. Same thing here where we're saying, okay, how do we control for behavioral bias? Because we have a non-probability methodology, we don't know if we're going to have bias in the sample. It's very likely that we'll have some, but we just can't measure it. So let's look at the census page views. Let's look at the distribution of the census and see whether our panel matches that. And then we can use that as a weighting variable. The problem is you have to make sure that the census level information that you have is also accurate. Okay? And there's a cookies per person relationship to get from the panel to the census. The only way to prove that you've actually done that is to validate it. And you have to validate it against a probability panel. Okay? So we're pointing at these two sort of white circles here where we want to build. They're expensive, they're difficult to do, but they're probability validation panels. That basically any of the assumptions of any of these methods are validated directly using that methodology. Okay? It's for someone who's a methodology person like me, that's where there's always going to be a gap, because somebody could say to you, well, how do you know that your panel is representative? Now, how do you know? Well, this is how we're going to know. Okay? By validating across methodologies, jackknife replication, probability validation panels, and census calibration. It gets a little bit of terminological confusion, but it really is the way forward. And I'll give you I already sort of said this, but for when you get the presentation for yourselves at home, because I know you're going to want to read it when you're having trouble sleeping, you've got it there in front of you. Okay? So jackknife replication is a way for us to test our estimates of unique visitors, page views, and duration. So what we do is we derive a sampling distribution, and this is an example of one in the US. Okay, so it's pretty cool. So for the top 500 or so sites, we've basically created a mean value of this is a unique visitor, okay? And this is the estimated variance across that over 2 different months. So this is hundreds of calculations, and this is the mean. And then we fit a polynomial through it just to make things even dodgier. But these lines are very close to each other, and this amount of variance across, between them is very, very low. Okay? That tells me that even though you use 50 different partners to recruit your sample, and you use different offers to bring those people in, that at the end of the day, across the top 556 sites, your estimates are very stable. You don't, otherwise they would be all over the place. And this number here, instead of it being 0.01, would be 10, 20, 30%. Okay? So this is all very good news. Okay? Jackknife replication is very powerful. But where it's limited is that it assumes that the resampling that you're doing comes from a sample that originally included everybody who could possibly be in the panel. And I can't prove to you that we can do that today. So how am I going to do it? We'll create a probabilistic panel and make sure that the estimates that we got from jackknifing match the probability validation panel. So again, the emphasis is on cross-validation. This is one way to validate it, but I'm telling you that there's still questions. There's still an assumption there that, well, did that original huge panel of 40,000 people that you have in Mexico really have every type of user? Right? I can't positively say yes. I can say probably because we do all this stuff, but the best way to do it is to actually create a probabilistic panel and compare these two numbers. Okay? So we also did it for page views. That's actually also very, very small, so it's good news for page variance as well. And basically, summarized down here, Jackknife assumes that an empirical distribution function, that's just the one that we derive, I call it an EDF, is representative of the population. Well, this is mitigated by large sample sizes. So the more people you have in your panel, the more likely it is that you actually have every type of user, but it's not absolute proof positive. It requires validation. Device census calibration, which is our way of getting rid of behavioral bias that we have, is a nice stratification method that reconciles panel-only census-based gross activity levels to corresponding tagged sites. Okay, so this is a nice way to get rid of behavioral bias. But again, it also has assumptions, and I'm just going to take you all the way to this. Okay. If you want to use census calibration, you have to prove that, in fact, the cookies per person number that you have from your panel is the same as the reality of the cookie deletion in the wild. Okay? Well, how do you measure that? Well, one way to validate it is to look at a probabilistic validation panel. As it just so happens that we have a random panel with our software on it, with our meter on it, in the United States. So I took all the different categories and I said, what's our panel cookies per person number? And what does the cookies per person number look like in a probabilistically recruited panel? Okay? So they're side by side and there are no statistically significant differences. So that's one way to triangulate on whether or not that cookies per person number that creates a unique visitor is real. It's not just an artifact of the way we develop our panel. It has to be validated across a probabilistic panel. Okay? Now, that's just the panel that exists in the US, and US methodology is a little bit different than international. So my argument is that basically to cross-validate everything that we're doing, you need to build at least a few probability validation panels around the world so that you can cross-validate census calibration, you can cross-validate jackknife replications, and everybody can get, here's the amount of error around this estimate that I have, and here's the amount of confidence that I have in the ComScore number. And now that you've survived all of that, you're at the summary slide. Basically, the challenges, the future of digital audience measurement really are unprecedented. I mean, it was difficult before. It's really, really complicated now, and we're going to have to use things like dynamic empanelment, and the way cookies work now is going to have to be really scaled up. Okay, we're going to have to use multi-source and mixed methodologies. Measurement across platforms and locations. We're going to do a lot of site tagging. We're going to look at what happens across different operating systems. We're going to use static IP information for household common panels. Duplication issues are going to be an issue. We're going to have to use a lot of different types of information in order to get duplication across usage so that you get a true net incremental reach. Okay? You don't want to be counting people twice. You don't want to have cumulative reach. You want incremental reach, right? And we want industry standards for how those things are done. We have a lot of ideas about how to do this. We've got a lot of experience with it. But if we just create our own, again, somebody else can just reinvent the wheel differently. And again, we'll still have 4 numbers. And that's not going to help the digital online world. Money's not going to come over from TV, from print, while there's people arguing about what the real number is. Okay? So we need to get some industry standards behind this additional complexity. And finally, we really argue for a probabilistic reference point. Okay, at the end of the day, most media researchers, most market researchers are more familiar with probability-based methods. That's what they went to school and learned. That's what they do every day when they develop a small panel, a survey panel. Stuff that we do, like non-probability panels, a jackknife replication, all that stuff is, you know, I mean, we can use it. It's in operations research. It's in a lot of textbooks, but it's not the kind of stuff that people are familiar with. At the end of the day, you really want a probabilistic reference point. And frankly, it's still a very, very high-quality source to triangulate against, to validate your approaches. So, you know, we're strong advocates of that. And in our recent tenders in the UK, Spain, Australia, we've actually said we'll go out and build one of these panels to validate everything that we're doing. And if there's some extra corrective weighting that we need to do, we'll do it. And this is the panel that'll tell us how to do it. It's a very expensive proposition, but you really have to take digital measurement to the same level as the other media are measured. And this is, I think, the way forward. So I'm finally done. And congratulations for hanging in there, everybody. Thanks a lot.